The forest was unusually quiet, save for the rhythmic crunch of boots against the damp earth. Emma tightened her grip on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the towering pines whole. She had been walking for hours, her original plan to hike the well-marked trails, now a distant memory. Somewhere along the line, she had veered off course, whether by accident or subconscious choice. She couldn't say. All she knew was that the path behind her felt as foreign as the one ahead. Her breath hitched when the flashlight flickered once. Then again. Panic clawed at her chest as the beam dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the trees. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, shaking the device in a futile attempt to revive it. But the inevitable happened. The light died completely, plunging her into suffocating blackness. For a moment, Emma stood frozen, her ears straining against the silence. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps, not hers. They were deliberate, slow, and far too close for comfort. Each crunch of leaves sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her veins. She turned instinctively, ready to bolt back the way she had come. But something stopped her dead in her tracks. There, pinned to the gnarled bark of an ancient oak tree, was a note. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy, she could see the dark stains marring the paper. Blood. Her stomach churned as she forced herself closer, her trembling fingers brushing against the rough texture of the tree. The message, scrawled across the page, was brief but chilling. "Turn back or join them." "Join who?" Emma whispered aloud, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. She spun around, scanning the impenetrable darkness for any sign of movement. Nothing. Yet the footsteps continued, growing louder with each passing second. Before she could react, a low growl echoed through the woods, reverberating deep within. Her bones. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Her mind raced with images of wild animals, rabid and hungry, lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. But the rational part of her brain refused to accept that explanation. This place felt wrong. Unnatural, like it existed outside the boundaries of reality itself. Emma's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. Against every fiber of her being, she reached out and plucked the note. From the tree, folding it carefully and shoving it into her jacket pocket. Whatever this was, she needed proof. Not just for herself, but for anyone who might find her if she didn't make it out alive. She took a hesitant step backward, then another, her eyes darting frantically between the trees. The footsteps were closer now, almost deafening in the stillness, and then she saw it, or rather him. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by a hood pulled low over his head. He moved unnaturally, his limbs jerking, as though controlled by invisible strings. Emma opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The man tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. For a fleeting moment, she thought he might speak, offer some explanation for what was happening. Instead, he raised a hand, pointing toward the dense thicket behind her. His lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that gleamed white even in the faint light. And then he vanished. 1 second he was there, solid and menacing. The next he was gone, leaving only the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down on her. Emma stumbled backward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She didn't know where she was running to, only that she had to get away. The trees blurred together as she sprinted blindly, branches whipping at her face and arms, tearing at her clothes. Finally, gasping for air, she collapsed onto the forest floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, but at least the footsteps had stopped. For now, she was alone. Or so she thought. A soft rustling nearby caught her attention, and she froze, her eyes wide with dread. Slowly, she turned her head toward the sound, praying it was nothing more than a squirrel or a bird. What she saw instead made her wish she had stayed lost forever. Crouched mere feet away was another figure, smaller and slighter than the first. This one wore tattered clothing, their face obscured by a mask made of twigs and leaves. In their hands, they clutched a crude knife, its blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. They tilted their head, mirroring the gesture of the hooded man before slowly standing upright. Emma scrambled to her feet, adrenaline surging through her veins. Without thinking, she bolted again, weaving between trees and leaping over fallen logs. Behind her, the masked figure gave chase, their movements eerily silent despite the chaos they caused. Every time Emma dared to glance over her shoulder, they were closer, their grotesque masks seeming to leer at her with malevolent glee. Just when she thought her legs would give out, she spotted a faint glow in the distance, a campfire. Relief flooded through her as she pushed herself harder, desperate to reach safety. As she drew nearer, however, her relief quickly turned to confusion. The fire burned brightly in the center of a small clearing, but there was no one around. No tents, no supplies, nothing to indicate human presence. Still, she couldn't ignore the warmth radiating from the flames. Collapsing beside the fire, she held her shaking hands out to absorb the heat. It was then that she noticed the objects arranged neatly around the perimeter of the clearing. Skulls, dozens of them, perched atop stakes driven into the ground. Some were old, weathered by time. Others looked disturbingly fresh, their empty eye sockets seeming to watch her every move. Emma's breath hitched as she realized the truth. She wasn't alone after all. Someone or something was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. And judging by the scene before her, mistakes here often ended in death. As she sat there, paralyzed by fear, a sudden noise pierced the night, a low, melodic hum emanating from somewhere deep within the woods. At first, it sounded like wind whistling through the trees, but soon she recognized it for what it truly was: singing. Multiple voices, harmonizing in a language she didn't understand, growing louder with each passing second. Emma's pulse quickened as the realization dawned on her. Whatever was coming for her wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot, as the chanting grew deafening. Emma felt a sharp sting on her arm. Looking down, she saw a dart protruding from her skin. Her vision blurred instantly and the world began to spin. Before darkness claimed her, she caught sight of several figures stepping into the clearing, their faces hidden beneath grotesque masks. One of them leaned down, whispering words she couldn't comprehend. But the last thing she heard before, slipping into unconsciousness, chilled her to her core. Welcome to the circle. The world came back to Emma in fragments, disjointed and surreal. The first thing she noticed was the cold, sharp and biting, seeping through her clothes and into her bones. Her head throbbed with a dull ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, each wave of pain bringing her closer to consciousness. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, uncooperative, as if weighted down by invisible chains. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, all she could see was darkness. Panic surged within her, raw and primal, until her vision adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in what appeared to be wooden planks above her. A ceiling? No, it couldn't be. Not after everything she'd seen. The masked figures, the skulls, the haunting melody that had lulled her into unconsciousness. Emma blinked rapidly, trying to piece together where she was now. The air smelled musty, tinged with the faint metallic scent of rust and decay. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upright, her hands brushing against something soft yet damp beneath her. Dirt. She was lying on dirt-packed ground inside some kind of structure. A cabin, perhaps? Or worse, a tomb. Her breathing hitched as memories flooded back in flashes. The blood-stained note, the hooded man, the chase through the woods, the clearing filled with skulls. And then, the singing, that unearthly chorus that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. Emma shuddered. wrapping her arms tightly around herself as though she could ward off the terror threatening to consume her. She forced herself to focus. Survival depended on clarity, not panic. Turning her head slowly, she scanned the space around her. It was small, cramped, and eerily silent except for the occasional creak of wood settling overhead. In one corner, she spotted a pile of old blankets, moth-eaten and frayed, stacked haphazardly beside a rusted lantern. Across from her, a crudely built table stood against the far wall, its surface littered with objects she couldn't quite make out in the gloom. But what caught her attention most was the door, or rather the lack thereof. There was no visible exit, no window, nothing to suggest how she'd gotten here or how she might escape. Just four walls closing in around her, suffocating and oppressive. Emma's heart sank. "Think," she told herself fiercely. "You're still alive. That means they want something from you." As if on cue, a low groan echoed through the room, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching from outside. Heavy, deliberate steps that reverberated through the wooden floorboards. Emma scrambled backward instinctively, pressing her spine against the wall behind her as though she could melt into it. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out all other sounds. The door creaked open, revealing two figures silhouetted against the pale morning light streaming in from beyond. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by shadows. The other was slighter, shorter, their features partially hidden beneath a hood pulled low over their head. Neither spoke as they stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind them. For several agonizing seconds, no one moved. Emma stared at them, her chest heaving with shallow breaths, while they simply stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Finally, the taller figure broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice gravelly and devoid of emotion. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, delivered with such finality that it sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through her veins. "Who are you?" Emma managed to choke out, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steady it. "What do you want from me?" The shorter figure tilted their head slightly, almost curiously, before stepping forward. They reached up and pulled back their hood, revealing a young woman with piercing green eyes and sharp cheekbones. Her expression was unreadable, neither hostile nor friendly, but something about her gaze sent a chill down Emma's spine. "We didn't bring you here," the woman said softly, her tone calm yet unsettling. "You brought yourself." "What does that even mean?" Emma snapped, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "I was hiking, I got lost. Then your friends decided to play creepy games with me in the middle of nowhere." The tall man let out a low chuckle, the sound hollow and devoid of humor. "Friends? Oh no, sweetheart, those weren't our friends, not exactly." Emma's stomach churned. "Then who were they?" "They're part of this place," the woman interjected, her voice taking on a strange, almost reverent quality. "Just like we are, just like you will be soon enough." Emma's mind raced, trying to process their cryptic words. None of this made sense. How could anyone belong to a place like this, a nightmare wrapped in shadow and ritual? She shook her head, violently, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "No," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "I don't believe you. This is insane." The man knelt down in front of her, his dark eyes boring into hers. Up close, she could see the lines etched deeply into his weathered face, the scars crisscrossing his forearms. He looked like someone who had endured unimaginable hardship and inflicted just as much. "You'll understand eventually," he murmured. "But first, you need to know why you're here." Before Emma could respond, the woman stepped forward and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Enough talk," she said sharply. "We don't have time for this." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded curtly and rose to his feet. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the door, leaving Emma alone with the enigmatic woman. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the distant call of birds somewhere outside. Emma studied the woman warily, searching for any sign of weakness or vulnerability. But her posture remained rigid, her expression unreadable. Finally, the woman sighed and crossed the room to sit on the edge of the rickety table. For the first time, Emma noticed the object clutched in her hands, a leather-bound journal, its pages worn and yellowed with age. "This isn't what you think it is," the woman said quietly, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "This forest, it chooses people. It calls to them when they're broken, lost, desperate. You didn't stumble upon us by accident, Emma. You were meant to find us." "How do you know my name?" Emma demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of her mounting fear. The woman smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Because we've been waiting for you." To distract herself from the suffocating tension in the room, Emma's thoughts drifted back to the events leading up to her ill-fated hike. She remembered sitting at her kitchen table late one night, staring blankly at the stack of unpaid bills scattered across the surface. Her life had unraveled so quickly she barely recognized herself anymore. It had started with the breakup, a messy public spectacle that left her reeling. Then came the job loss, the eviction notice, the endless string of disappointments that seemed determined to drag her under. By the time she packed her backpack and set out for the wilderness, she hadn't been looking for adventure. She'd been running from her failures, her regrets, the person she used to be, and now, trapped in this godforsaken cabin with strangers who spoke in riddles, Emma realized the truth. The forest hadn't chosen her because she was special. It had found her because she was broken. The woman leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Do you know what happens to those who answer the call?" she asked, her green eyes glinting in the dim light. "Some survive, others don't. But everyone who enters these woods leaves changed." "Changed how?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman's smile widened, though it never reached her eyes. "That depends on you." Before Emma could press further, the door flew open once more, and the tall man returned, his expression grim. "We have company," he announced tersely. "Who?" the woman asked, standing abruptly. "Another hiker," he replied. "Lost, disoriented. Perfect candidate." Emma's heart sank. Candidate for what? What twisted game were these people playing? As if sensing her unspoken question, the woman turned to her, her gaze piercing. "Your trial begins tonight," she said simply. "And trust me, you'll wish you'd never set foot in these woods." The woman handed Emma the leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Read this," she instructed. "It'll explain everything." But as Emma opened the book, the pages began to bleed ink, forming words that shifted and rearranged themselves before her eyes. The last thing she saw before the text consumed the page entirely was a single sentence written in bold, crimson letters. "Only the chosen may leave alive." The leather-bound journal felt heavier in Emma's hands than it had any right to. Its pages, once blank and innocuous, now pulsed with an eerie energy, the ink writhing like living tendrils across the parchment. She stared at the words scrawled in crimson, "Only the chosen may leave alive," and felt a cold dread settle deep within her chest. What did it mean? Who were the chosen? And what happened to those who weren't? Before she could ask, the woman grabbed her arm. Her grip firm, but not unkind. "Come," she said sharply, pulling Emma to her feet. "We don't have much time." Emma stumbled after her, still clutching the journal tightly. Her mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. The tall man followed close behind, his presence looming like a shadow. Together, they stepped out of the cabin, into the grey light of dawn. The forest looked different now, not the dense, oppressive wilderness she'd wandered through before, but something far more sinister. The trees seemed taller, their gnarled branches twisting together to form a canopy that blotted out most of the sunlight. Strange symbols carved into the bark glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the hum of unseen insects. It was as though the woods themselves were alive, watching, waiting. They walked for what felt like hours, though time seemed distorted here. Every step forward only deepened Emma's unease. She glanced down at the journal periodically, its shifting text taunting her with cryptic phrases. The first trial is truth. Lies will lead to ruin. Trust no one, not even yourself. Each sentence sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her veins. Was this some kind of test? A game designed to break her, or worse, a prophecy foretelling her fate? Finally, they arrived at a clearing unlike anything Emma had seen so far. At its center stood a massive stone altar, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Surrounding it were crude wooden stakes, each topped with a skull, some human, others animal. Candles flickered erratically around the perimeter, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe independently of their sources. "What is this place?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the low chanting that had begun emanating from somewhere nearby. "This is where the trials begin," the woman replied, her tone devoid of emotion. She gestured toward the altar. "Place the journal there." Emma hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, to flee this nightmare. While she still could, but where would she go? The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, a labyrinth with no exit. Trapped between fear and futility, she obeyed, placing the journal gently on the cold stone surface. As soon as her fingers left the book, the chanting grew louder, more insistent. Figures emerged from the trees, their faces obscured by masks, made of bone and bark. They formed a loose circle around the altar, swaying rhythmically as their voices rose in harmony. Emma recognized some of them, the hooded man who had pointed her deeper into the woods, the masked figure who had chased her. But others were strangers, their movements mechanical, almost hypnotic. The woman stepped back, joining the circle, leaving Emma alone at the altar. For a moment, all she could do was stand there, frozen in place, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Then the tall man approached, his expression unreadable beneath the harsh flicker of candlelight. "The first trial requires honesty," he intoned, his voice carrying an unnatural weight. "Answer truthfully or face the consequences." Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. What do you want me to say?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial filled with a viscous black liquid. Holding it up to the light, he examined it briefly. Before uncorking it and pouring its contents onto the journal, the ink reacted instantly, bubbling and hissing as though alive. Words began to form again, coalescing into a single question written in bold letters. "Why did you come here?" Emma's breath hitched. Of all the questions they could have asked, this one cut deepest. Why had she come here? To escape her failures, to punish herself for everything that had gone wrong in her life. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I don't know," she stammered finally, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I just wanted to get away." The chanting faltered for a split second, then resumed, with renewed intensity. The tall man frowned, his dark eyes narrowing as he studied her face. "That's not good enough," he growled. "You must answer truthfully." "I am," Emma cried, desperation creeping into her voice. "I swear, I don't know why I came here. I thought maybe if I kept moving, I could outrun everything. My mistakes, my pain." Her voice broke, and she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of her confession. The journal's pages shimmered, the glowing text shifting once more. "Your pain binds you, only truth can set you free. For a long moment, silence reigned. Even the chanting ceased, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. The figures surrounding the altar remained motionless, their masked faces unreadable. Emma dared to look up, her vision blurred by tears, and then without warning, the ground beneath her feet trembled violently. The candles toppled, plunging the clearing into near darkness. A low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, sending chills down Emma's spine. The figures scattered, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. "What's happening?" Emma shouted, scrambling to her feet, but neither the tall man nor the woman responded. They too had vanished, leaving her utterly alone. Panic surged within her, raw and primal. She turned in circles, searching for any sign of escape, but the forest had transformed once again. The trees loomed closer, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air grew colder, sharper, until it burned her lungs with every breath. Then she saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the dim light. It wasn't one of the masked people. This was someone new. Someone familiar. "Jake?" Emma gasped, squinting to make out his features. Sure enough, it was him. One of the hikers she'd encountered earlier, the one who had vanished during the chase. Relief flooded through her, mingling with confusion. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Jake didn't answer. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. His face was pale, drawn, as though he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his clothes were torn and stained with dirt. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "None of us should." Emma's relief evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. "What do you mean? Where have you been? What's going on?" Jake hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting someone or something to appear. When he spoke again, his words were barely above a whisper. "This place, it's not real, not entirely. It feeds on your fears, your regrets. That's why we're here, because we couldn't let go." Emma shook her head, struggling to process what he was saying. "I don't understand. Are you saying this is some kind of hallucination?" "No," Jake snapped, his tone sharp with frustration. "It's real enough. Trust me, I've seen things, done things." He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the ground. "But it's not just the forest, it's us. We brought this on ourselves." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. If what he said was true, then the forest wasn't merely a physical location. It was a manifestation of their inner turmoil, a reflection of the darkness they carried inside. Which meant escaping wouldn't be as simple as finding the right path. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Why now?" Jake met her gaze, his expression grim. "Because I think you're stronger than the rest of us. Stronger than me. You've got a chance to survive this, Emma. Don't waste it." Before she could respond, a deafening roar shattered the silence. Both of them spun around just in time to see a massive shadow detach itself from the trees and lunge toward them. Emma screamed, stumbling backward as Jake shoved her aside, shielding her with his body. When the dust settled, he was gone. Emma collapsed to her knees, trembling uncontrollably. The journal lay open at her feet, its pages blank once more. But as she stared at them, a single drop of blood fell from her palm, splattering across the paper. Slowly, new words began to form, written in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood perfectly. "The next trial awaits." Emma stared at the journal, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. The foreign script seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, each symbol etched into the page glowing faintly, before fading back into obscurity. Despite not understanding the language, the meaning resonated within her, a chilling clarity that seeped into her bones. "The next trial awaits." Her breath hitched as she realized the weight of those words. Jake's sacrifice, or disappearance, had bought her time, but it wasn't over. Not even close. Whatever this forest was, whatever force governed its twisted logic, it demanded more from her. And Emma knew deep down that running wouldn't save her now. She had to face what came next. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Emma stood up and brushed the dirt off her hands. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to take one step forward, then another. The forest loomed around her, darker and denser than ever before, as though it were closing in, tightening its grip. Shadows danced unnaturally between the trees, their movements too deliberate to be random. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint echo of footsteps, not hers, not human. She clutched the journal tightly against her chest, drawing some small measure of comfort from its presence. For all its cryptic messages and eerie transformations, it felt like the only tether she had to reality, or perhaps it was just another illusion, another layer of the nightmare designed to keep her trapped here forever. As she walked, the air grew colder, biting at her skin despite the layers of clothing she wore. Frost began to form on the ground, delicate crystals spreading outward in intricate patterns. It was impossible. This forest shouldn't have been cold enough for frost, but nothing about this place made sense anymore. Then she saw it. A narrow path winding through the trees, marked by rows of lanterns that flickered weakly in the gloom. Each lantern bore the same strange symbols carved into the bark of the surrounding trees, glowing faintly as if alive. Something about the sight made her stomach churn, but she couldn't ignore the pull it exerted on her. Against her better judgment, she followed the trail. The path led her to a clearing unlike anything she'd encountered so far. At its center stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls warped and splintered with age. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying with it the faint scent of burning herbs. Unlike the oppressive stillness of the rest of the forest, this area buzzed with activity. Figures moved about, their faces obscured by masks made of feathers and twine. They worked silently, tending to fires, stirring cauldrons, or sharpening crude tools. Emma hesitated at the edge of the clearing, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Before she could decide, a voice called out to her, one she recognized instantly, Emma. She turned sharply, her eyes locking onto the figure standing several feet away. It was Lila, the third hiker who had crossed paths with her earlier. Like Jake, she looked worse for wear. Her once neat ponytail was tangled and matted, her clothes torn and smeared with mud. But there was something else in her expression, something hard and calculating that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "You're still alive," Lila said, her tone neutral, but her eyes darting nervously toward the masked figures milling about. "I wasn't sure you'd make it this far." "What is this place?" Emma demanded, clutching the journal tighter. "What's happening to us?" Lila stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It's a test, a game. Only the strongest survive." "That's not an answer," Emma snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why are we here? Who's doing this to us?" Lila hesitated, glancing over her shoulder again. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We brought ourselves here. Our pain, our guilt, it called to this place. Once you're inside, there's no escaping unless you win." "Win what?" Emma pressed, her voice rising. "What does winning even mean?" Before Lila could respond, one of the masked figures approached them, holding a tray laden with steaming cups. The smell of herbal tea wafted through the air, oddly comforting despite the circumstances. The figure extended the tray toward them, gesturing for them to take a cup. "Drink," Lila urged quietly. "It'll help." Emma hesitated, suspicion coiling in her gut. "What's in it?" "It's safe," Lila insisted, though her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a cup. "Trust me." Emma wanted to argue, to demand answers, but exhaustion and fear clouded her judgment. Reluctantly, she accepted a cup and took a cautious sip. The liquid was warm and bitter, but it calmed her frayed nerves almost immediately. For the first time since entering the forest, she felt a semblance of peace, but it didn't last long. As the effects of the tea settled in, the world around her began to shift. The clearing blurred at the edges, the masked figures melting into shadows. Even Lila seemed to fade, her features dissolving into smoke. Panic surged within Emma as she realized what was happening. The tea had been laced with something, some kind of hallucinogen meant to break her further. "No!" she cried out, dropping the cup. "What did you do to me?" Lila's expression hardened, any trace of sympathy vanishing. "You didn't trust me," she said coldly. "This is your punishment." Emma staggered backward, trying to steady herself as the ground tilted beneath her feet. The journal slipped from her grasp, landing open on the dirt. Its pages glowed brighter than ever, the symbols writhing like snakes across the parchment. Words formed rapidly, shifting faster than she could read. Betrayal cuts deepest. Choose wisely. Only one may leave. Her vision swam, the forest twisting into grotesque shapes around her. Through the haze, she saw Lila pick up the journal and tuck it under her arm. Then, without another word, Lila turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Emma alone and disoriented. Through the fog of the drug-induced haze, fragmented memories surfaced. Pieces of conversations Emma hadn't thought much of at the time, but now felt significant. She remembered Lila talking about her brother, the one who had gone missing years ago. His name was Daniel, and he had been an avid hiker, drawn to remote locations like moths to a flame. He'd vanished without a trace during one such trip, leaving behind only rumors of cult activity in the area. At the time, Emma had dismissed Lila's obsession with finding him as grief-fueled desperation. Now, she wondered if there was more to the story. Another memory surfaced, Lila arguing with Jake late one night, their voices low but heated. Emma had caught snippets of their conversation, something about finishing what he started and making things right. At the time, she'd assumed they were referring to some personal vendetta, but now she wasn't so sure. And finally, the most damning recollection of all, Lila slipping something into Emma's water bottle earlier. That day, she'd written it off as paranoia, chalking it up to exhaustion and stress. But now, staring at the empty cup in her shaking hands, she realized the truth. Lila had betrayed her. The hallucinations began to fade, replaced by a crushing clarity. Emma sat up slowly, her head throbbing with the aftershocks of whatever concoction Lila had given her. The clearing was empty now, the masked figures gone, the fires extinguished. All that remained was the faint scent of burnt herbs lingering in the air. She rose unsteadily to her feet, her mind racing. Lila had taken the journal, the key to navigating this nightmare, and left her for dead. Betrayal burned hot in her chest, mingling with anger and despair. But beneath it all, a spark of determination ignited. If Lila thought she could win this twisted game alone, she was wrong. Emma clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She would find Lila. She would get the journal back, and she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As Emma stumbled forward, following the faint trail of footprints Lila had left behind, she noticed something odd about the trees lining the path. Each trunk bore a fresh carving, identical to the ones she'd seen earlier, but these were different. Instead of symbols, they depicted faces, familiar faces. One of them was Jake's, another was Daniel's, and the third was hers. Beneath each face, a single word was etched into the bark: chosen. Emma's breath hitched as she stared at the carvings on the trees, each face etched into the bark with chilling precision. Jake, Daniel herself, beneath their likenesses, that single word, chosen, seemed to pulse with an ominous energy as though mocking her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface of the tree, bearing her own face. The wood felt unnaturally cold, almost icy, and for a brief moment she swore she saw the carving shift, the eyes narrowing slightly before returning to their original state. Her stomach churned, This forest wasn't just testing her, it was playing with her, unraveling her sanity thread by thread. But Emma refused to let it win. Not now, not after everything she'd endured. She tore her gaze away from the trees and focused on the trail, ahead. Lila had taken the journal, but Emma knew she couldn't rely solely on retrieving it to survive. There had to be more to this place, more rules or patterns governing its twisted logic. And if she could figure them out, maybe, just maybe, she could turn the tables. The path wound deeper into the forest, growing narrower and darker with every step. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Shadows danced, erratically between the trees, their movements too deliberate to be natural. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural growl echoed through the woods, sending chills down Emma's spine. Then she saw it, a faint orange glow flickering through the trees. Firelight. Cautiously she approached, her heart hammering wildly. In her chest, the source of the light turned out to be another clearing, smaller than the previous one, but no less menacing. In its center stood a massive stone pedestal, atop which rested a rusted dagger. Around the pedestal, 3 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground, each adorned with a mask, one made of feathers, another of bone, and the third of twisted vines. But what caught Emma's attention most were the figures gathered around. The pedestal. Masked individuals swayed rhythmically, their voices rising in a haunting chant. At the forefront stood Leela, clutching the leather-bound journal tightly against her chest. Her expression was grim, her posture rigid, as though she were waiting for something. Emma hesitated at the edge of the clearing, unsure whether to confront Lila directly or observe from a distance. Before she could decide, the chanting stopped. Abruptly, and all eyes turned toward her. "You shouldn't have followed me," Lila said sharply, stepping forward. Her voice carried an edge of desperation, her usual composure cracking under the weight of whatever burden she carried. "I don't have a choice," Emma shot back, her tone steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You think taking the journal makes you special, that it'll save you? It's not about saving me," Lila snapped, her hands trembling as she clutched the journal tighter. "It's about finishing what they started." Who are they?" Emma demanded, her voice rising. "Stop talking in riddles and tell me the truth." Lila hesitated, glancing nervously at the masked figures surrounding them. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Daniel, my brother, he didn't disappear. He was taken by them, by this thing." "Whatever it is." Emma's mind raced, piecing together fragments of their earlier conversations. "So that's why you're here, to find him?" "No," Lila admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm here because I failed him, because I couldn't protect him, and now I have to make it right." Before Emma could respond, the masked figures began moving, encircling the pedestal like vultures closing in on prey. One of them stepped forward, taller and broader than the rest, their mask carved from polished obsidian. They extended a hand toward Lila, gesturing silently for the journal. Lila hesitated, her grip tightening on the book. For a fleeting moment, Emma thought she might refuse, but then she surrendered it, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The figure opened the journal, flipping through its pages quickly before stopping at a blank spread. With deliberate movements, they pulled out a quill, tipped with a black feather, and dipped it into a small vial of crimson ink. Then, without hesitation, they pressed the quill to the page and began writing. Emma watched in horror as the words formed, not in ink, but in blood. Each stroke pulsed with an unnatural energy, glowing faintly before fading into the parchment. When the figure finally stepped back, the journal hovered momentarily in mid-air before snapping shut with an audible click. "The final trial begins," the figure intoned, their voice deep and resonant. "Only one may leave alive." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd of masked figures. their swaying intensifying as though feeding off the tension in the air. Lila turned to Emma, her expression torn between guilt and determination. "This is it," she whispered. "We fight, or we die." Emma's mind flashed back to the moments leading up to her arrival in the forest. She remembered packing her backpack late one night, her hands shaking as she stuffed clothes and supplies inside. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the counter. Texts from friends and family begging her to reconsider, to stay, to talk about what was wrong. But she hadn't listened. She couldn't. The pain of her breakup, the shame of losing her job, the suffocating weight of failure. It had all become too much. She needed to escape, to outrun the person she'd become. And yet, even as she drove toward the wilderness, part of her knew she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward it, toward the darkness within herself. The masked figure motioned for Emma and Lila to approach the pedestal. Reluctantly, they stepped forward, standing side by side as the crowd of masked individuals formed a tight circle around them. "The trial requires sacrifice," the figure announced, holding the rusted dagger aloft. Its blade gleamed dully in the firelight, stained with what looked like dried blood. "One of you must prove your worth. The other will perish." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Beside her, Lila stiffened, her jaw clenched tightly. Neither of them moved. "Choose wisely," the figure continued, lowering the dagger onto the pedestal, "or we will choose for you." Silence descended over the clearing, broken only by the crackling of the flames. Emma glanced at Lila, searching for some sign of weakness, some indication of what she intended to do. But Lila's expression remained unreadable, her gaze fixed firmly on the dagger. Then, without warning, Lila lunged forward, grabbing the weapon and spinning to face Emma. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that Emma barely had time to react. She stumbled backward, raising her arms instinctively to shield herself, but instead of attacking, Lila held the dagger out to her, hilt first. "Take it," she urged, her voice trembling. "End this." Emma stared at her, stunned. "What are you doing?" "I can't go back," Lila admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Even if I survive, I'll never forgive myself for failing Daniel. But you still have a chance. You can leave this place. You can live." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The masked figures watched silently, their swaying growing more frenzied with each passing second. Finally, Emma reached out and took the dagger, her fingers closing around the cold metal. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meeting Lila's gaze. "So, am I?" Lila replied softly. Before either of them could hesitate further, Emma plunged the dagger downward, not into Lila, but into the pedestal itself. The stone cracked violently, splitting apart with a deafening roar. The journal, still resting atop the shattered remains, burst into flames, its pages curling and blackening before disintegrating entirely. The masked figures screamed in unison, their masks shattering as though struck by invisible force. The fire surged higher, consuming the clearing in a blinding inferno. When the smoke cleared, Emma found herself alone. As the flames died down, Emma spotted a narrow path winding through the trees, illuminated by the first rays of dawn breaking through the canopy. At the entrance stood a figure cloaked in shadow, their face obscured by a hood. They raised a hand, pointing toward the horizon. "Go," they commanded, their voice echoing faintly. "Your journey isn't over yet." Behind her, the forest began to crumble, dissolving into ash and dust. Emma didn't look back. She ran, but as she reached the edge of the tree line, she noticed something strange. A tattoo on her wrist, freshly inked. It depicted a single word written in the same cryptic script from the journal, "Survivor." Emma emerged from the forest at dawn, her legs trembling not just from exhaustion, but from the sheer weight of what she had endured. The world outside felt surreal, too bright, too quiet, as though it existed in a different reality altogether. She stumbled onto a gravel road, her breaths coming in ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Behind her, the forest was eerily silent, its oppressive darkness replaced by an unsettling stillness. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, watching to see what she would do next. She looked down at her wrist, where the tattoo now marked her skin. A stark reminder that this nightmare hadn't been some fever dream. The word survivor shimmered faintly, its glyphs shifting ever so slightly when caught in the light. It wasn't just ink. It was alive, pulsing with the same energy that had coursed through the journal's pages. Emma clenched her fist tightly, trying to ignore the crawling sensation beneath her skin. She didn't know what it meant, only that it bound her to something far greater and darker than herself. The sound of tires crunching against gravel snapped her out of her thoughts. A truck rounded the bend, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. For a moment, Emma hesitated, unsure whether to flag it down or retreat further into the shadows, but survival instincts won out. She stepped into the middle of the road, waving her arms frantically until the vehicle screeched to a halt. The driver, a grizzled man with a thick beard and weathered face, leaned out the window. "You okay, miss?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "What are you doing out here? I got lost," Emma stammered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Can you take me to town?" The man studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering on her dirt-streaked clothes and wild-eyed expression. Finally, he nodded. "Hop in." Reintegration. Life after the forest. The drive to the nearest town was mercifully short, though every mile felt like an eternity. Emma sat silently in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window as the landscape shifted from dense woodland to rolling hills dotted with houses. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Had Lila survived? What had happened to Jake? And most importantly, why had she been chosen? When they arrived, the driver dropped her off at a small diner on the outskirts of town. He gave her a wary look before driving away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot. Emma took a deep breath and pushed open the door, the smell of coffee and fried food hitting her like a wall. She approached the counter, her movements robotic, and ordered a cup of black coffee without meeting the waitress's curious gaze. As she sipped the bitter liquid, fragments of memory began to resurface, pieces of conversations, fleeting images, emotions she couldn't quite place. Everything about the forest felt distant now, almost dreamlike, yet the tattoo on her wrist grounded her firmly in its reality. She pulled out her phone, which miraculously still had a sliver of battery left, and dialed the first number that came to mind, her best friend Sarah. "Emma?" Sarah's voice was choked with disbelief. "Oh my God, we've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Emma lied, her tone clipped. How could she explain what had happened? That she'd walked into a living nightmare and somehow clawed her way back out? "I need you to come get me." 20 minutes later, Sarah arrived, her eyes wide with relief and worry. She wrapped Emma in a tight hug, murmuring reassurances that everything would be all right. But as they drove back to the city, Emma remained silent, staring out the window as the world blurred past. She wanted to believe Sarah's words, to let herself sink into the comfort of familiarity. But something inside her had changed, irrevocably. Days passed in a haze. Emma returned to her apartment, grateful for the solitude it provided. Friends and family called constantly, bombarding her with questions she couldn't or wouldn't answer. Reporters camped outside her building, eager to hear the story of the woman who had vanished into the wilderness and returned unscathed. But Emma refused to speak publicly, deflecting inquiries with vague responses about getting lost and surviving on instinct. Inside, however, she was unraveling. Sleep eluded her, her nights plagued by vivid dreams of the forest, the chanting, the masks, the glowing symbols etched into trees. During the day, she found herself drawn to news articles about missing hikers, searching for any mention of Daniel, or Jake, or even Lila. There was nothing, no bodies recovered, no traces of their existence beyond the stories people told. Then one evening, as she scrolled aimlessly through social media, a notification popped up on her screen, a message from an unknown sender. Her stomach tightened as she clicked it open. You think you escaped, but you're still part of it. Emma's hands trembled as she read the words over and over again. Who had sent this? Was it someone from the forest watching her from afar? Or was it her own paranoia manifesting, twisting reality until she couldn't trust anything, not even herself? Before she could respond, another message appeared. They'll find you. They always do. Panic surged within her, raw and primal. She deleted the messages immediately, blocking the sender and turning off her phone. But the damage was done. The forest had followed her home. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to resemble some semblance of normalcy. Emma threw herself into work, pouring all her energy into rebuilding the life she'd abandoned. She reconnected with old friends, started therapy, and even adopted a dog, a scrappy mutt named Max who never left her side. On the surface, she seemed fine, better than fine even. But beneath the facade, the scars remained. The tattoo on her wrist continued to pulse faintly, its presence a constant reminder of the choices she'd made. She often wondered about Lila, whether sacrificing herself had truly ended her suffering, or if she was still trapped somewhere between worlds. And Jake, she hoped he had found peace, wherever he was. One night, unable to sleep, Emma sat at her kitchen table with a pen and paper. She wrote furiously, spilling her thoughts onto the page without censorship. Words poured out of her about pain, guilt, resilience, and redemption. When she finished, she realized she'd written something profound. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. It was more than just a reflection. It was a truth she'd lived, a lesson carved into her soul by fire and blood. For the first time since leaving the forest, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she hadn't escaped unscathed, but she had survived. And that alone was worth something. Months later, while hiking alone in a nearby park, Emma stumbled upon a clearing that stopped her in her tracks. In the center stood a single tree, its bark scarred with carvings. She recognized them instantly, the faces of Jake, Daniel, and herself. Beneath each carving, the word chosen glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her knees buckled as realization washed over her. This wasn't over. The forest hadn't released her. It had merely given her a reprieve. Someday, it would call her back. Until then, she vowed to live fully, embracing every moment as though it might be her last. Because sometimes, survival isn't about escaping the darkness. It's about learning to carry it with you and finding strength. In the shadows, the end